I'm Virginia Thompson, Vice President of Product Management at Integration Point, and this is your update for October 23, 2018. While recent weeks have thankfully slowed in terms of new tariffs put in place, there have been actions and updates for global importers to continue to track. In addition, as always, ensuring compliance in this ever-changing landscape is one of the most challenging aspects to manage. So in this week's update, we'll take a look at a couple of those updates and how they may impact your need to stay on top of it all as well. The first update is of greatest impact to Canadian importers. The Canadian steel and aluminum duties on U.S. goods had gone into effect on July 1st. And then on October 11th, Canada announced that they would put in place a remission process. The remission process is similar to the exclusion process in the United States. When they made that announcement, they announced that those measures were to offer a balanced response that would support Canadian producers and manufacturers, while the government continued to work towards the complete repeal of the U.S. tariffs of Canadian steel and aluminum. Basically, what they were saying was that they were trying to balance their attempt to offset the impact the domestic importers of these steel and aluminum products, while also trying to work with the United States government to repeal those duties altogether. Then on the 17th of October, they published which of those HS numbers would be eligible for the remission order or the exclusion process. So understanding which of those HS numbers of all of the steel and aluminum HS numbers that have the elevated duties that are now being assessed is important for importers into Canada to be aware of, because in addition to going through the process, you need to be aware of which of those numbers are even eligible in the first place. There's actually two lists out there. One list has numbers that are eligible only for a short period of time through the end of 2018, and the second list has numbers that are eligible for an indefinite period of time. So you have to not only know whether or not the HS number that you're interested in is on one of those remission order lists, but also which list it's on. There have also been stories out there of some of the examples of why Canada chose to go this route. For example, there have been certain commodities that have seriously impacted specific industries in Canada, such as the importers of aluminum cans have impacted their brewery business because they've been unable to import aluminum cans in order to put the domestically brewed beer into because of the backup of orders waiting to be filled into those cans because of the impact of U.S. can manufacturers that have actually been closed down because of the cost of the steel and aluminum being imported into the United States. So there's kind of been a trickle-down effect of all of these tariffs that have been imposed upon the steel and aluminum, starting with the elevated duties that the United States has put upon steel and aluminum that has been impacting multiple supply chains into and out of multiple countries around the world. A second impact that importers into the United States, in this case, might want to be aware of is that recently, at the end of last week, the USTR published a notice to importers to be aware of the fact that in September, there was an update made to a number of changes in Chapter 3 and Chapter 44 in the regular tariff, but the corresponding numbers in Chapter 99 to these numbers were not updated in the tariff at the same time. And so what this means is that those numbers that were deleted in Chapter 3 and Chapter 44 continued to appear in the tariff as though you needed to file the retaliatory tariffs or the Chapter 99 tariffs because they were numbers that are on the third list of Section 301. And so if you continue to follow that direction and file the Chapter 99 numbers, you were paying that 10% duty rate. And so the statement that was made or the instructions that were given in the CSMS message 18000621 there instructs you that you are allowed to file for a duty refund through the PSC process if indeed you did file an entry back as far as September 24th for those. It's two different subheadings in Chapter 3, and it is actually 14 subheadings that were deleted in Chapter 44 that had 38 corresponding new subheadings in Chapter 99 for them. So you want to take a look at those particular numbers if you have products that fall under Chapter 3 or Chapter 44 to see whether or not you possibly overpaid some of those Chapter 99 10% duties and are eligible to file a PSC. In addition, you may also have admitted goods in a privileged foreign status into a foreign trade zone for the same reason. And if so, when you make ultimate entry on those goods, again, you would have the ability to file under the PSC process for a refund on those additional duties. So those are some of the recent updates. But in addition, there's some new things that importers sort of need to keep an eye out for, because whenever you have changes of this sort that are happening, you have to sort of keep an eye out for some of the new impacts or changing impacts, or how customs agencies around the world are managing these impacts themselves. Because frankly, it's not just importers that get affected by these things, it's also the customs agencies that have to keep an eye out for how it changes how they interpret regulations and how they enforce regulations. And one of the big ones out there that's been impacting both customs and importers is the fact that now there are frequently times when there are lots of different HS numbers that have to be filed on the single declaration line or single entry, and it gets very tricky to know what order you're supposed to be putting all of those HS numbers. CBP in here in the United States just recently, last week, issued again another CSMS message, and this was 18000624, spelling out exactly what order to put all of these various numbers in if you do indeed have a situation where you've got these multiple tariff numbers. Because it may not be just a Chapter 99 and your regular commodity tariff number. You might be using Chapter 98. Maybe you've got MTB for number that falls under the miscellaneous tariff bill. Maybe you've got quota. Maybe you've got one of those handful of numbers that has 232 and 301. Maybe you've got some combination of all of these various tariff numbers, and so there's direction given in that particular CSMS, which I've kind of spelled out on the slide here, as to what the order is of all of those different tariff numbers and how they should appear on the entry line. Another very interesting ruling that importers in the United States definitely need to be aware of is taking particularly extra due diligence more than ever when it comes to origin declaration. CBP issued an origin ruling back in the middle of September. It's this headquarters ruling here, 300226. Having to do with NAFTA marking rules. Obviously, origin declaration is always important, but importers tend to pay particularly, importance to it, I would say, when they are declaring preferential origin. And it's more important than ever now to pay attention to your origin declarations in this world of 301 and 232, because it drives so much having to do with what duties you are paying. It's more than just when you're paying preferential or declaring preferential origin status. And because what this ruling said is that the NAFTA marking rules are inapplicable for determining origin for the purposes of duty determination. That's sort of the kind of in a nutshell what this origin ruling said from customs. And obviously every ruling is very specific to the specific case that was being requested in that ruling. In this case, it was for an engine that was manufactured in Mexico of parts that came from China. And so you'd have to look at that particular ruling and see if it applied to your specific commodity that you were comparing it to. But what's important to understand about it is that basically what it was saying is that the marking rules are for marking purposes, which of course everybody knows, but sometimes people use the marking rules and think of them as something that they can use for determining origin rules for the purposes of duty determination as well. And Customs was making it very clear that no, the marking rules are for marking rules. And when you start talking about determining what your origin is for the purposes of duty determination, you really have to meet those substantial transformation standards. So you want to be extra careful, more so than ever today, when you're importing goods into the United States, to make sure that you've analyzed your products very carefully when they're manufactured in Mexico and Canada in particular, particularly if they've got Chinese inputs or inputs from any of the countries where the retaliatory duties are in place right now, to make sure that you've analyzed them. And if necessary, perhaps that you have sought a ruling request yourself, or that you've consulted with a trade attorney or a consultant, whether it's in the United States or perhaps in some other country, because you may be importing into another country where, for example, a duty of this sort has been put in place in response to one of the U.S. duties, and you may have a similar situation there. So wherever you're importing into, this is a time, I would say now more than ever, where origin declaration is extremely important, and you want to be extra careful to make sure you're looking at that. And then finally, just a quick update on where we're at with the World Trade Organization adjudication process, because we're approaching an important date in that entire process. And as a reminder, what's going on in that whole process, we had an important date back in August. On August 29th, a number of WTO cases were first filed there, because basically when the initial cases or initial duties were imposed by first the United States and then the other countries in response to the U.S. Cases against those other countries on steel and aluminum, the countries each put cases or filed cases with the WTO requesting judgment against the other nations, basically saying that they were unfair and that they breached the WTO rules, and asking the WTO to rule on that point. The United States, for example, says that they're a matter of national security, and the other countries say that no, that they're not a matter of national security and they are an infraction of WTO rules. And so they're waiting for those to be ruled on. And there's a process that has to go through. And we're coming up on sort of the next date in that process, because once those cases are put through the process and they started again on August 29th, there's a 60-day period of time, which we're coming up on October 29th. And if no agreement is reached during that 60-day consultation period, then basically the dispute settlement body of the WTO meets and tries to come up with judges that will sort of work through a block of WTO appellate judges to kind of work on a settlement ultimately. So that's on their agenda at the October 29th hearing, is to kind of work out who those judges will be and move the process forward through the next step of this entire process. That process in and of itself may take some time. One of the other issues that's going on is that the U.S. is working to try to block the appointment of certain judges on the WTO, and so that process may take some time. And there's a lengthy process, even once that appellate group of judges is appointed, that this sort of thing could take. It could be years, quite honestly, before these cases are ultimately settled. So the countries that you see over there to the left, which is China, the EU, Canada, Norway, Mexico, Russia, and Turkey, are all waiting to hear their cases heard. And then on the right, you've got the U.S. has filed cases against Canada, China, Mexico, and the EU. And then that bottom case is a second case that the United States has pending in the WTO against China. And that one is basically asking the WTO to rule that it's acceptable for the U.S. to impose additional duties against China due to intellectual property right violations. So again, a lot going on, both at the individual country level and at the World Trade Organization level for importers to stay on top of. Here at Integration Point, we're always recommending to our clients that they keep an eye on such quickly changing conditions in the countries where they're managing global trade. We monitor and update our tariff schedules for over 205 countries and territories on a daily basis and incorporate our content data directly into our GTM platform to help our clients stay on top of their changing compliance needs. We'll continue to monitor these ongoing regulation changes as they take place, and we'll provide regular updates through our videos. As always, thanks for listening.